Now that we know the full details of All Elite Wrestling on TNT TV, we talk about an interesting conversation that Chris Jericho had where he talks about the AEW roster, the war with WWE, and CM Punk. It's all coming up next on the Squared Circle Psychobabble. Hello and welcome to the Squared Circle Psychobabble. My name is Michael Valenti. This is Ralph Valenti. Don't forget to subscribe. Hit that bell for notifications as we're trying to hit 10,000 YouTube subscribers before All Elite Wrestling's all out. So now we know the full details of All Elite Wrestling on TNT. It will premiere October 2nd at 8 p.m. So now that we know the full details, I want to bring us to a very interesting interview that Chris Jericho just had with Collider, and talking about how AEW could succeed on TV and on TNT. And he brings up talking about the All Elite Wrestling roster. He talks about venues. He talks about CM Punk. So let's dive into it first. Talk about this supposed war with WWE. And Chris Jericho said that it's a war by proxy. You know, we're not going to be selling out 15,000 tickets per show. We want to do the smaller venues, 3,000 to 5,000 tickets. To make it look good on television. Is this a good idea or a bad idea, Ralph?
I think it's definitely a good idea, especially when you consider how it's going to come across when what it looks like on television. So, think anything that they're going to be doing going forward, especially because it's going to be on a weekly basis on television, they have to be very calculated and they don't want to take any steps backwards. So, in order to kind of make sure they sustain that professional look, I think it's going to be important for them to continue to try and sell out some of these smaller venues. I think it will come across as much more professional on television in comparison to what New Japan Pro Wrestling tried to do with their G1 Climax. We know that the first show here stateside, they weren't able to sell that out. It certainly did not look like it was sold out, and that came across on TV, and it didn't necessarily look too good on them. So I think catering to a smaller audience, making sure that they're able to fill the arena, that's going to come across as looking much more professional on television. One of the things that kind of sticks out to me is going back to when ECW was actually formed. I remember hearing an interview with Paul Heyman and kind of comparing themselves to WWE at the time, where they had all the pyro and all the glitz and all the glamour. And he said, well, rather than go with smaller budget type pyro where it's going to look very carny and almost like it was them trying to pretend to be the big show, let's just hide all that. We'll have a much darker type of show. We'll look different. It will feel raw. It will have a completely different feel. And, I'm not saying AEW necessarily can't have pyro, but I think trying to cater to a much larger audience, especially from the outset of this, it would be a mistake for them. So I think sticking to that 4 to 5,000 individual range, that's probably going to be best for them because it's going to come across as more professional on TV.
And the other thing too you got to take into consideration is social media, with fans being able to take
Yep.
pictures and upload them very instantly on Instagram, on Twitter, on Facebook. If those venues are empty, they're going to let people know. So it's better to start small and then grow from that than try to go big and then have to
Right.
shrink. We know how WWE, we have these shows that don't necessarily sell well. Actually, there was a house show Monday night as the same night as the Raw reunion show, and there was like nobody there. Basically, it was just the entire floor section that was full, and there weren't even any seats in like the
Right.
bowl area. It was and obviously someone takes a picture of that, posts it all over social media, and of course that's not what you want going from episode 1 on AEW. I'm going to be interested to see like where the shows go. At least here in Connecticut, I would think they would start somewhere at like Bridgeport, the Webster
Right.
Bank Arena, Hammerstein Ballroom in New York, like those kind of venues. Definitely a good idea. And then you could grow into the bigger venues, or even when there's pay-per-views, you could sell the 10 to 15,000 seat arenas when you get the pay-per-views here. But let's keep going here. Talking about New Japan, talking about WWE as far as their roster is concerned. You know, Jericho said you can't be talking about now. We got to plan 3 to 5 years in advance, and he doesn't need to worry about WWE. Doesn't need to worry about New Japan. They need to focus on what we're doing as AEW. And I think this is a great thing to say, but can they execute that is the question. Are they going to be focusing on AEW, or are they going to be worried about what WWE's doing, or poking fun at WWE, or seeing what New Japan's doing? What do you think of that?
Well, I think it all depends on what ends up happening on Wednesday night once SmackDown goes to Fox, because I know there was obviously the rumors going around that NXT could potentially moving to FS1, which would kind of force some type of competition between the two companies and the two shows. So there's certainly that which obviously would cause some developments, and where AEW would be forced to make certain decisions based on what WWE was doing. If they're allowed to just have their show on Wednesday nights and NXT does not go on FS1 or does not have a show anywhere else except for the WWE network, I think that provides them a little bit of freedom and probably a little bit of relief, because they won't have to have that added pressure where they're now competing with somebody, especially if it's WWE, where they're right now obviously the biggest company as far as wrestling is concerned. So to think that AEW would be able to compete at that level, especially right out of the gate, I think it's probably wishful thinking. So not having NXT would obviously be a relief for them, I think, right at the beginning. The one thing that I will say with that is, I know they keep saying, or the thing that keeps being brought up is, we're not going to focus on what WWE is doing, but it seems like whether it was at Double or Nothing or Fight for the Fallen or on the weekly show being the Elite, it always seems like they're trying to poke fun at WWE, which, I don't necessarily have a problem with it, but it kind of sends mixed messages, especially when you consider they're saying, we're going to focus on building our brand. We're not going to talk about WWE. We're not going to be focused on what they're doing. We're just going to be focused on what we're doing. Cody Rhodes has always been very vocal, especially when you look at the very riveting speech. He was very passionate when he said that you can't counter produce our product. So you know if you're going to say that WWE shouldn't necessarily acknowledge AEW because it kind of gives them a rub, when it gives them attention and kind of legitimizes them a little more. Well, if AEW goes and does that for WWE, it kind of legitimizes this whole war that is kind of, I guess, if you want to say pending, because it's not necessarily there just yet. Yes, there's certain things that WWE is being forced to do, and there's a slight competition. But as of right now, there is no legitimate, aside from the Evolve show being on the WWE network, there hasn't been really any head to head competition. So I think AEW should tread a little lightly on that, just because it's kind of like, why would you want to poke the bear? Why would you want to piss off Vince McMahon, who's essentially been the czar of professional wrestling for the last 30 some odd years? You know what I mean? So, um,
That's a great point.
I know it's all fun and games. I know that's kind of their laid back nature, but they got to be careful with that, especially because on the last episode of Being the Elite, I think they took some subtle shots at The Undertaker, talking about his brother Cain and stuff like that. And, you'll
Right.
win over a lot of the disgruntled fans, but when you start going after guys like that who have been in the industry for so long and have so much respect, you might want to be a little careful with how they kind of approach those situations.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought up what happened on Being the Elite to open the show. They were basically, for those that didn't see it, Peter Avalon was trying to talk to an executive about his frustrations with the librarian character, and he wants out of it. He wants to do something else. But then Trevor and Arthur, who are the executives here, are saying, you know what, we have a team of writers, and this is, good shit that they're writing. Obviously, what Moxley's talking about with Vince McMahon, and this whole long-term booking with Baron Corbin and all that stuff. And it's funny because AEW doesn't have right now what WWE has, and that is stars. They have Seth Rollins, they have Roman Reigns, they have Becky Lynch, and they can build them if someone goes down. Someone is there willing to take the spot over. AEW, on the other hand, they have to start building these stars. And Chris Jericho had an amazing thing to say in this interview. He said, they got a lot of guys to build.
Yep.
We have Jericho, we have Jim Ross, we have John Moxley, Dustin Rhodes, but really, there's a whole collection of guys that we need to get over here. Sure, the hardcore wrestling fans knew who the Young Bucks are. Sure, they know who Kenny Omega is. But we need to introduce them to a nationwide audience, and we can't just throw 40 guys out there and say, hey, get
Yep.
over. We have to get one at a time over. How do you do that with this current roster? I mean, sure, one thing I will say, AEW is doing a good job with this so far, with the likes of Darby Allin against Cody Rhodes, and the whole thing with Shawn Spears and Luchasaurus and Jungle Boy. They are finding ways to get these guys over, but these are one-off shows and pay-per-views for a small audience. How can we get this going with a nationwide and a consistent weekly episodic show?
Well, I think that's really where you got to rely on some of your more experienced talent, the guys who have been in the big show, the guys who have been in WWE or been in positions where, they've really been able to kind of promote themselves or promote a company where it's not just expected for you to go out and have a good match. You're kind of always wearing that company tag, like if you're in WWE. So your Cody Rhodes, your Jim Rosses, your Chris Jerichos, your Moxleys, those are the guys that they're going to have to depend on to kind of elevate these guys to the next level. Um, because like Jericho even points out, yes, you're going to have your hardcore fans who are going to know who the Young Bucks are. They'll know who the Lucha Brothers are. And then kind of you have all these other younger talents who kind of were just working on the independent scene, and this is really their probably their biggest break. So when things go to TV, that's when things are going to get real. That's when everyone's got to step up. But I do think Jericho is right. You're going to need more established stars like Jericho's or people that are equivalent to him, because if you have like a Hangman Page beat him for the title, or you have Darby Allin, one of those guys that's kind of up and coming and maybe not as well known, that helps build credibility for those guys. So I think it's important for them to kind of make sure they're pushing the good younger talent and establishing their roles, but they also have to try and go out there and get some of the best talent in the world. So, they've done a good job, obviously, getting Jericho and getting Moxley. That's a good start. Dustin Runnels, obviously, or Dustin Rhodes, whatever you want to call him. Um, he's obviously older towards the tail end of his career. Who knows how many more times he's going to compete in ring. But they're going to have to rely on the experience of those guys if they're going to want to get everybody else over.
Yeah, definitely. And this the AEW championship match that we're gonna have at All Out, Jericho
Yeah.
versus Hangman Page, is such a crucial match because it's really gonna determine the path that AEW has. If Hangman wins, they're pretty much going, all right, we're gonna push the new guys quick and heavy. With Jericho winning, it's like, okay, we need to, we gotta simmer these guys, gotta slow build them to a point where they can get some credibility before they beat
Right.
Jericho. And I had this discussion with people outside of the show, who should be the first AEW champion. I know we had an episode a while back before we even had this match announced, but here's how I think of this. Whoever wins the AEW championship is going to be solely dependent on who they want as the second champion. And the reason I say that is, say they want Kenny Omega as the second champion. Who does he win it off of? It's probably going to be easier and build more credibility if he wins it off Jericho than it does if he wins off Hangman Page. But if they want someone like MJF to be the second champion, that works better beating Hangman Page. And of course, the dynamics of face and heel and all that stuff comes into effect too. But here's the other thing we got to talk about. This brings up whole credibility thing. Um, Obviously, the news of CM Punk and the talk of CM Punk coming to AEW possibly with him being announced for StarCast. Does that mean he shows up to All Elite Wrestling? We've had numerous episodes this week about that. So Jericho actually mentioned this, and he said, we don't need him. We don't need him. So do they need CM Punk with their current roster?
I don't think they necessarily need him. I think it would make their path to success much easier, and I think they'd get much more credibility out of the gate if they had somebody like CM Punk on their roster, especially because it would help attract some of those fans that that stopped watching WWE altogether. Because I think Punk really uh, kind of encompasses what those fans want to see. Obviously the thing that got Punk over in the WWE was the pipe bomb. And I think that was during a time where you also had a lot of fans that were disgruntled, and a lot of what Punk said during that pipe bomb interview or sit down, whatever you want to call it, really resonated with a lot of the fans and the way they felt. They felt like certain people were put in positions that the top guys would be the only guys that would get over. Other guys that were on the undercard never had an opportunity to get over, like your CM Punks and people of that nature. So that was really the thing that got him over eventually. So I think to the fans that are really going to be watching AEW, the fans that he would kind of, uh, you know, strike home with, so to speak, that's the type of fan that he would attract and bring to AEW with him. And obviously, I mean, CM Punk, granted, he's been out of the game for however long. His name obviously carries a lot of
5 years.
credibility still to this day. So, um, do they need him? No, not necessarily. But if they did have him, I don't think anybody in the AEW locker room would necessarily complain because he would help obviously establish the roster and help put over some of the younger guys if he were to go head to head with them.
You know who wants CM Punk in AEW more than anybody else in this world? I shouldn't say more than anybody, but you know who said he wants him in
Jim Cornette.
AEW?
Yeah.
Jim Cornette, our old buddy that caused a lot of comments in our
Yep.
videos last week. He said he would put all the money in the world on CM Punk because that's the kind of buzz they need for AEW. Yes, they have Jericho, and Cornette didn't mention Moxley, but they need more stars that people know, and that's definitely
Right.
one of them. Here's another thing that people may not even realize that this could be something to think about, but they have a partnership with AAA, and there's this Triple Mania show that's coming up soon, and on that card, who's having a match with Cody Rhodes is former UFC fighter Cain
Yep.
Velasquez. I'm not saying that he might show up in AEW, but maybe that's something that could happen and bring in ratings. A former MMA fighter coming into AEW and get some of that crossover mainstream audience. That's what
Yeah.
they need. That's why Brock Lesnar is so successful in WWE because obviously the nostalgia factor from those that were lapsed fans that remember him from 2003, 2004. You have the MMA people that know him from dominating UFC before his diverticulitis kicked in and, you know, he lost a couple matches. And of course, the fans today that love to hate him. So that's why he works. Getting someone like a CM Punk or a Velasquez is the same exact thing. So I think that that would be a good move. Obviously, you question if you bring them in, how does that affect their guys they have now? It could still work, but you always have that question. But I want to talk about some of the guys that are on the current roster, and especially the young guys. Jericho brought up two in particular, Jungle Boy and MJF. They're both 23 years old, and he talked about how his daughters, who don't watch wrestling, even though he's a professional wrestler, but they like Jungle Boy. And he says that could tap into a demographic that might not be touched right now in professional wrestling. And that is that teen heartthrob demographic that, you know, the girls can love because of his looks. And Jungle Boy has the looks. I mean, his dad was a heartthrob too. So it's, you know, apple doesn't fall far from the tree, as they say. So do you think that's an interesting approach to how they could attack another demographic with AEW?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's even something we've talked about on the show before. I know that's been WWE's formula, especially when you look at, kind of their approach with John Cena. Obviously, Cena's or those type of characters, they're meant to cater to the kids. And the kids are obviously the ones that are going to go to the show. They bring their parents because they're not going to go by themselves. They buy t-shirts, they buy action figures, they buy all that type of stuff, which kind of ensures them long-term success. So I do think it's a good idea to kind of target the younger demographic because I think that they already have the hardcore fans with your Omegas and your Young Bucks and obviously your Jerichos and people of that nature. So if you have somebody like, Jungle Boy or Luchasaurus or whoever, MJF, if they can connect with the younger crowd, I think that can only help them and expand their product to a different type of demographic.
Absolutely. So, I mean, you got so many young guys there to push over. Jungle Boy, I think, has a lot of
Yeah,
potential. I think he needs to put on a little bit of muscle, but then again, he's only 23 years old, so there's still time to add that
definitely.
weight. But him and Luchasaurus, I think, you know, that's a tag team right there that could be elevated to the
Yep.
top quick. And I think obviously they're super over with the current hardcore wrestling fan. And I think they can tap into some of those demographics that maybe WWE are having a tough time tapping into right now. So I do want to bring up one
Sure.
last point that Jericho had in this segment here in his interview. He was asked about the women's division, and you know, obviously they have a lot of Japanese women wrestlers that they have to introduce, and he mentions how um, they he doesn't even know their names. So that's going to be part of the problem, trying to introduce those women wrestlers one by one. But in helping bring that roster, he was asked if you could have any woman in the world to be on the roster, who would it be? His answer was Tessa Blanchard. Do you think Tessa Blanchard going to AEW would help ratings?
Uh, I don't know if it would necessarily help ratings. I think it would definitely boost the credibility of their product. Because outside of any of the female wrestlers in the WWE, she's probably the biggest name off the top of my head if I'm thinking.
Mm-hmm.
Impact for what it is, it doesn't necessarily do the best ratings. So I can't really say
No. Does it even do ratings?
not not a significant amount. And I think I think going to AEW would only um help her career in a way. But I can't say that she necessarily boost the ratings only because she wrestles on Impact now and it's not like their ratings are through the roof. Credibility wise,
True.
and as far as the female division is concerned, she's definitely within the top probably three. If you ask anybody their top three, you're probably to get Tessa, Becky, and Charlotte, probably by most hardcore fans, um, at least off the top of my head. So I mean, rating wise, I'm not so sure about that, but I think that her going to AEW would only help their roster, and I think it'd be a good move for her career. Only because,
Yeah.
yes, Impact is more established than AEW right now, but AEW is without a doubt the hottest thing within the wrestling industry.
Totally agree with your point there. And obviously, Impact's contract situations, from what we know, they're not exactly full time. They could do stuff in the
Yeah,
independent scene. So I'm sure, I'm not sure when her contract actually runs out with Impact Wrestling, but when she does, in fact, become a free agent, she's going to be one of the hottest free agents in the wrestling industry. And I think AEW obviously have the head start on that one, given that her father is managing one of
right.
AEW's talent right now. And that's
Yep.
Tully Blanchard being the manager for Sean Spears. So this is going to be, the countdown finally begins on when we will see All Elite Wrestling on TNT. Let us know what you think of this whole interview that Chris Jericho had in the comments below. Tell us what you think AEW needs to do to succeed on TNT. Don't forget to share this all over social media. We're on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter at SCPB Podcast. And of course, subscribe. Hit that bell for notifications. We're trying to hit 10,000 YouTube subscribers before All Elite Wrestling's All Out. For Ralph Valenti, my name is Michael Valenti, and thank you for watching the Squared Circle Psychobabble.